But I guess, Dre, let's start with you. Obviously, you've been deep in all of this from the very beginning. Canada beating Mexico, this fallout from Iceteca. What are you hearing in, whether it's in the vacuum that is Twitter or elsewhere, about this match, just about Mexico's sort of state of affairs? I mean, give me your take on things as they stand right now.
So it's a good thing that Mexican culture as a whole doesn't have a tendency to overreact to things, right?
No, very calm and collected.
Honestly, you would think it was like the U.S. after the TNT game last cycle, the way that the response has been. And I think there's reasons to be way more disappointed and smashing that red panic button based on the result and performance against the United States than against Canada. Because at least against Canada, they showed fight at the end. They clawed their way back into that game. Canada was really asking for time at the end of that, hanging from the crossbar. So I thought there was more of a response from Mexico there. What there isn't on that team is a lot of goals right now, because Raul Jimenez is obviously not at the level that you would expect. Funes Mori hasn't been, the go-to, volume goal scorer that they would like. They've got plenty of playmakers. Still have a good, solid squad. But against the better teams in CONCACAF, they're clearly struggling, especially away from home. But again, if I'm Mexico, if I'm the coaching staff, if I'm the fans right now, I like the fight that I saw against Canada. I hate the result. I don't like anything about what I saw against the United States, because I can't recall, you guys maybe know better than I can't recall a time when the U.S. looked that much better, that much more dominant than Mexico in official competition. And I don't think that there was quite that distance between the two teams in Canada. Throw in the elements. None of this is going to matter to them. Obviously, the narrative is like on a runaway train right now. But I think with some perspective, it wasn't as bad as the result is.
Yeah, Jimmy, for your take on this, I mean, do you think it was all of those factors, as Dre just mentioned, in terms of the conditions, the weather, all these things, just feels like Mexico's finally experiencing what I feel we talk about in CONCACAF World Cup qualifying, right? The difficulties of a pitch, the difficulties of conditions. They're used to playing in adverse conditions, some of those players playing in Mexico are growing up in the Americas, so to speak, with the humidity and elevation of Azteca and these things. Do you feel like they're getting a taste of that medicine in a way that they haven't, or do you think this is just sort of a little bit a blip on the radar in terms of what they're going through? Because they're still not in a bad place in terms of the table, third in the table, just a point in front of Panama.
No, I think they're going to be fine. Ultimately, the runaway narrative, I love that kind of description of how it's going for Mexico and the media and all that good stuff. I do want to touch upon really quick that if there's ever inclement weather or the field is bad, it always feels like there's one team that's always using that, but the other team has to play in the same conditions and on the same crappy field. I don't understand why that's such as big of a narrative as it is. I'm sure there's plenty of Canadian guys that are on the field. Like, I don't want to play on a frozen, turf field, but they use it to their psychological advantage. Very similar to how Azteca, I know it's not easy to play in altitude. And we've, as the U.S. men's national team, we've trained in Denver before to get used to altitude. So we've been prepared for that game. That's just one element of it. And yes, when you play at altitude, that first 10 or 15 minutes, you can't feel your legs. You don't really know where you are. It's crazy. And then when you get past that first wind and get into your second, you're fine. But for that first 10 or 15 minutes where it really hits you, I think that should play into it a little bit, but I don't think that's what the story should be about. I really want to get into this Mexican team and why it took them so long to play with urgency. When they go down a goal, they even did it at the end of the United States game. They started to play and maybe a little bit more direct, but even if they were trying to play through midfield and kind of maybe align themselves more with their DNA, which is playing out of every situation, they were doing it with a little bit more purpose. The runs were a little bit harder. They were running with trying to try to make something happen every time they went forward, as opposed to, the pace, the rhythm of it was different. And we saw it against Canada as well. And they almost had that game at 2-2, to Dre's point, and to everybody watching. They were there. So imagine they didn't play that well, and they still had a chance to maybe escape with a point. It's a real fine margin at the highest levels, and they're just on the wrong side of those margins at the moment. They have a ton of home games in this last 6 games. I think 5 of 6 are at home, if I'm not mistaken, or 4 out of 6.
Was that Mexico?
Yes, Mexico.
Mexico's got 4 games left at home. They've got the most of anybody in terms of home games left.
So if they can't do the business with 4 out of 6 at home, no matter who they're playing against, they don't deserve to go to a World Cup, in my humble opinion. So if they can just got to tap into that urgency a little bit more, and I think they'll end up seeing more goals from the players that we expect them to score.
Dre, in your balance between Canada and Mexico, because a lot of times we've always talked about U.S., Mexico, and then we talk about the opponent as this thing that should be controlled by the U.S. or Mexico. And when they don't, we talk about the failures of the U.S. and Mexico. I mean, how much of this is Canada and the development of this team and the players and the quality that they have, at least in your perspective? How much of that is the Canada development versus the sort of falling off or the lack of form from Mexico in this one?
Yeah, so I got excited halfway through Jimmy's spiel there, because I thought he would say, I want to talk about Canada, right? Instead of,
I couldn't. I had to pile on Mexico, Dre.
I'm here for it. But I do think the attention ought to be, and obviously it's not neither here nor in Mexico is the attention going to be really on Canada, or are they going to be getting the level of coverage and credit that they deserve. But let's be absolutely clear, they deserve all of it, all of the story, all of the headlines based on the performances there and throughout these World Cup qualifiers. We just kicked off the second half of the Ocho, and Canada are deservedly top of the table. Yes, it's a fine margin. It's a 1 point lead over the two sort of CONCACAF giants. But I think they're a highly competitive team in a way that I don't remember them ever being. And John Herdman obviously gets a ton of credit for that. I think the story here is belief, right? It's the rise and the trajectory of belief for a Canada team that looks like they're convinced that they're going to the World Cup and mathematically look like they've convinced all of us they're going to the World Cup, and the seemingly lack of belief that we're seeing in Mexico when they don't have that fight for 90 minutes. Usually Tata Martino teams are aggressive. Usually Mexican national teams are really difficult to play against. Neither the US nor Canada really seem to be struggling or having this, horrific time. And it felt like Mexico was trying to match the intensity of both of those teams as opposed to what is the usual story, which is the other way around. The big thing I think for Canada beyond just the belief is that they have actual legit weapons to threaten you, right? So they're well coached, they're organized, they're not going to give you a ton of chances, but they've got now a number of guys, not one player that they depend on, but 2-3 players that can create. Tejan Buchanan is emerging as a proper star. Kyle Larin obviously scores 2 goals. We know what he was doing all the way back in his days in Orlando. So they've got more threats, I think, than they've had, at least in my memory.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's the difference, right? Is when we looked at teams that have a hope, and I use Panama, for example. They have a belief system. They're well coached, they're well organized, but on paper, you don't go, that's a team, that's a World Cup team when you compare them to the rest, right? Whereas Canada has that belief system and they're buying into that belief, but they also have the quality. We've seen in the past, whether it's Costa Rica, they have 3-4 players that you're like, okay, these are global stars. They can create an impact, but it's going to take more than that. And Canada seems to have a little bit more of that hybrid package. Jimmy, I want to get your take on this, and Dre, follow up on this question as well. How much does that result, Canada beating Mexico, change how we viewed the success of the U.S. getting 4 points in this last window, right? And doing what we say, win your home games, get a point on the road. How much does that change the narrative of that, knowing that this top 4 is now really packed, it's really crowded? Do we need to look back at some of these games and said there should have been more points out there? Or are we still in a good place considering we've got El Salvador home, Honduras home coming up, and Canada away?
I think that hopefully it gives some perspective. That was a word that Dre used a little bit earlier that sticks with me. And we've been talking about it, maybe not as specific as saying the word perspective. But when you see Mexico, who prior to this window were undefeated with 4 wins and 2 draws, they are going to struggle. Canada's going to go through something where all of a sudden it's not working. And they're going to go through they've already got to figure out John Herdman is the coach and they've got their players, but they're going to struggle. It's just going to be part of it. I'd be really impressed if they went through 14 games without having a couple moments where they didn't look great. Match day 1, they actually weren't great. They had to get a pretty fortunate penalty to draw with Honduras at home 1-1, if you remember on that. So I thought it was a penalty.
Well, Honduras were better. We don't have to go back to that, but I do think Honduras were the better team and humbled Canada, who probably looked at themselves on paper before adding that belief and that work that came from the Gold Cup with that makeshift squad as they were losing players to injury. Right. But they started to go, okay, it's going to take more than just this on paper or this belief system. We're going to actually have to earn the respect in CONCACAF, which I think they've been doing. Sorry to interrupt your point, Jim.
No, but you make a good point. And what I'd say is that hopefully it gives perspective, and hopefully to the American fan, that this isn't straightforward. This is an A to B or like a straight line from A to B that goes up, right? It's going to be down and up and down and up. But you hope that you're still kind of trajectorying up to make that happen. If you can't see me, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. It's a little bit harder to explain audio-wise. But I would say that in some ways, maybe lay off the team a little bit. That even Mexico, the great Mexico, and all their top attacking talent, they're having trouble scoring goals. They're having trouble figuring out their offense. I mean, this is a team that came in as the heavy favorites and looked like it. To win the whole thing, or at least be on top of the table at the end of all this World Cup qualifying, and they're struggling right now. And now they want their coach, who we all think and respect as a good coach, they want him out. It's really interesting for me how quickly things can turn. It's a knife's edge in some ways. I do, though, want to go back to Canada, to Dre's point. I am going to talk about Canada here. And I think what they learned in the Gold Cup, to tie two of your guys' points together, is that they could rely on some depth. We use the Gold Cup for the same reason. And I think we started to see, we can trust a Miles Robinson to be our guy in the back line. We can trust a Matt Turner. And with Canada, you're like, we can trust, whoever it is, Kyle Larin or well, even though
they continue to change their whole back line. That's what's impressive to me, is they don't even start the same back line every game. They play in a 3 or they play in a 4. They rotate these players, and they're all stepping up, getting convincing defensive performances.
It's been impressive. And then you add in the fact that they didn't even start Jonathan David last night. Jonathan David leads
because they watched the show, Jimmy. I got Kyle Larin in my CONCACAF 11. They were like, he's got a point there.
You call me Jenny. You call me Jenny or Jimmy. It doesn't matter, yeah. Heath. I know. I agree with you. Jenny and Jimmy both agree with you here. But the fact that they have that type of depth, when we played against Canada back in the day, you really just had to worry about Dwayne De Rosario, and that was really it. Now they had big guys up top, guys that would work hard and do the job, but they're nowhere near as talented as the guys that they have now. And the fact that they could have the luxury of bringing Jonathan David off the bench. The guy has 8 goals in Ligue 1. He's by himself. He's not tied with anybody else. And this is a league that has Mbappe and Neymar and Messi. It's not like they have chumps in Ligue 1. They have some of the top attacking talent in the world. And Jonathan David's name's on the top of that list. And he's not even starting against Mexico is wild to me. And it was the right call. It was the right call. Kyle Larin had a brace. And on top of that, they really attacked the vulnerabilities of Mexico, vulnerable on defensive set pieces. And you can catch them on the counter if you can turn them over when they're trying to play out of stuff. Scoring that goal right before halftime, I think, turned the tide, and then obviously scoring right after halftime sealed the game. But I like the intensity of and the attitude of Canada. I like that they're definitely bought into the project, and obviously now we're seeing the fruits of their labor. It's still a long way to go, but they're a team. I'll just say this: I'll get ahead of it and put my flag in the ground. If I had Canada in my group in the World Cup, I would be bummed because they're going to be very good, and they're a team that I wouldn't want to face.